Hi everyone. We're going to continue with our Mishna day learning. Continuing where we left off the other day, where we learned the first Mishnah in Berachot, Aleph Aleph. Today we're going to learn from still the first Perek, Aleph, but the second Mishnah. The question now is, Me'emetai korim et shema b'shacharit? From when can we start reciting the Shema in the morning? The previous Mishnah dealt with saying Shema in the evening time. The first answer given by the Tanakh, Misha Yakir ben Tchelet Levan, someone who can recognize, or the moment you can recognize the difference between the color Tchelet and Levan, and white. Now, what's the Mishnah referring to? Presumably, it's connected to the seeing the difference in the colors of one tzitzit. That tzitzit would have p'tiyat tchelet, right? A little bit of tchelet, one string of tchelet, and then everything else white. So this idea that we're talking about the tzitzit makes a lot of sense because there seems to be an intimate connection between tzitzit and Shema in general. In fact, the third paragraph of Shema, of course, deals with tzitzit. So this is just another example. In fact, there is an ancient custom in the ancient world that a slave would mark that slave, would put their chatima, their signature on that slave, on their clothing, right? Not mark, God forbid, on a person directly, but on their clothing as a sign that this person is a servant to me. So, in a sense, by wearing tzitzit, we are wearing the chatima, the signature of God, that we are God's servants. That perhaps might be one of the ideas related. A connected idea I once saw when I was visiting the Bible Lands Museum, poor people who didn't know how to actually sign their signature. Right? Remember the days of old where you just put an X if you didn't know how to write? So amongst the poor who didn't have the ability, they didn't have a stamp that they might be able to put into clay and mark their signature, they would actually use a tzitzit. The strings, they would push them into clay, they would push them into wax, and that would be their signature, sort of further developing this concept that we were connected. The tzitzit is a way of, in a sense, expressing our servitude to God, our acceptance of Ol Malchut Shemayim. So the first opinion is when you could see the color, the difference in the color between the tchelet and the white. The second opinion, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, ben tchelet dakarti, the difference between the color of tchelet, blue, to a green. This is a later period of time. Right? Blue and white, these are two totally different colors, so it's fairly easy to see the distinction. But between blue and green, which are similar colors, so presumably that has to be later when it's already a little bit more light outside that you can see the distinction. I'd like to suggest there's also a theological debate that's taking place here. The Tanakh, when he says the difference between blue and white, tchelet, the rabbis teach us, is to remind us of the sea, which reminds us of the heavens, which reminds us of the kisei hakavod, the seat of glory of God, God's self. In other words, when we would look at that tchelet, we would think of sort of the heavens. The white is a symbol of purity, right? We wear white on Yom Kippur, when we get married, right? When we die, moments of incredibly intense, pure states. We wear white. And it's almost as if perhaps the Tanakh is suggesting that you should see the distinction between white and tchelet, but realize that because we have the potential to be such angels, we can elevate all the way up to the kisei kavod, all the way up to the tchelet, the blue of the heavens and of God. Rabbi Eliezer seems to disagree, bein tchelet lecharti, between the blue and green. So what is green? I think the green, in this case, is the earth, is the green grass that one perhaps might see outside their window. There's something very nice about the time examples offered by Chazal. We don't need a watch. We just have to either look outside our window or look at our clothing, and we can know what time it is in terms of reciting the Shema. But Rabbi Eliezer's point that you should see the difference between green and blue, which obviously is a more difficult thing to see because they are much closer in color, I think has a theological challenge as well. Green represents the earth, the material world, and blue still represents the spiritual or the holy worlds. And perhaps what he's saying is you might think that these are two separate worlds, the green and the blue, and you have to distinguish between them. But in truth, we are meant to and called upon to take the material world and turn it into the spiritual world. That we don't have to be just like angels, and that's the only way we can get to God, but actually being engaged in the physical world, having a job, eating, engaging in a whole series of other physical activities, but doing them in such a way that we declare our connection to God, elevates them and makes them, in fact, quite holy. The Gemara on the Mishna suggests one other idea. It says perhaps the time is not when you can see the difference between blue and white in your tzitzit, or between blue and green, the difference between the sky and the grass, but rather when you can see a associate, a fellow, even a stranger, when you can recognize them from 4 amot away, 7, 8 feet away. That's when you know it's time to say Shema. Now, notice it's not a good friend, because a good friend, the Gemara tells us you'd be able to see and recognize from much further away. But from about 4 meters, from 4 amot away, you can begin to recognize the difference. I think the addition of this as a time frame of when you recite the Shema connects us to the idea that Shema is not just about accepting the kingship of God, but also the consequences of that acceptance, which is that God created the entire world and everyone in it in God's image, and therefore we have an obligation to have a positive relationship with every human being. And so we recite the Shema when we're able to see our fellow. Once we really, truly, genuinely can see our fellow and recognize them and see who they are, that's the right time to begin reciting Shema. Have a nice day.